Yeah, so I mean, we've had quite a few. We've had a few conflicts around just this pathway to reconciliation, as you know, Cheryl. And so I'll probably touch into a couple of those, just because that I think, as you and I chatted when I first phoned you, your thoughts and your perspective on how we just continue to move forward on this path that we've committed to, and in the best way possible, I think is important to also recognize that sometimes people have different interests, and sometimes those are expressed not peaceably, and that's part of the reality that we have been witnessing over the last years. And so not to ignore the challenges. I mean, I'm talking to us as a country. We can't ignore that these are difficult challenges in some cases to find a way forward that everyone is feeling good about. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so you're on the other, I could probably almost see you, could I?
I could probably, I'm waving at you.
So
I'm, just to give you perspective, I'm by the sea bus. I'm on the Mission Indian Reserve #1, as it's known as. But for Squamish Nation, we call it Oslahan Ochomeo, which is the Oslahan village. And so it's right by the sea bus. I'm just up from the marina that my late father and mother built. And I have a really good view of the city from here. So I'm just probably straight across from you right now.
So you could have essentially walked to SFU downtown while you were doing your MBA then?
It actually only took me about 20 minutes average to get to school.
Yeah.
Because I'm right by the sea bus. So
yeah, perfect.
13-minute jaunt across, I call it the modern canoe, sea bus. And then just a few minute walk up to BD. So, and I'm still involved with BD today. We have a lot of cohorts. We had a new cohort start online this year, so it'll be different.
Well, that's great to have to maintain a connection and be able to support the new students coming into the MBA.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when I did my MBA, it was the very first year the executive MBA was downtown. Before then, it was up on the hill.
Yeah.
And one of the really great parts was that we had a dinner together once a week in the tower, the revolving tower down at the Harbor Center.
Oh, okay.
So the students that attended that, which was pretty much all of us, really got to know each other, even outside of the classwork that you do in groups, while watching the skyline of Vancouver revolve around us over dinner. So I'm not sure that's still part of the program, but it was back then.
No, we just sort of do our own thing. And for my small group, our gathering place was Malone's, because it was just around the corner and we could get good food while we were meeting and doing our group work in those.
Yeah, no, it's great to have that group-based learning. I think all of the university programs are more oriented to that now, but it was perhaps pioneering in the EMBA those many years ago that I did it, that you worked on projects in groups so much, which is real life works, right?
It is a great concept because a lot of us still work together today. So it prepares you for working together and working in different group dynamics, which is part of, to me, what reconciliation is too. So it kind of fits in with what we're going to be talking about today.
And I will take that segue. It is now 2 minutes after 11 a.m. Seems like we've got a good group of people who have already joined us. So it's the right time to get started. I would just like to welcome everyone to joining us for our 7th virtual MP Brunch Connections event. This one on navigating the pathway of reconciliation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here for this very important and timely conversation. And thank you very much to Ms. Sheryl Rivers for joining us here to offer her perspective on this issue. Following Ms. Rivers' presentation, we're going to have opportunity for questions and answers. So at any time during the presentation, you can submit your answers at the Q&A box. It should be in the bar along the bottom of your screen. And we've got our dedicated staff who will be taking in your questions. And yeah, after the presentation, I will be answering as many as we have time for. So with that, I will pass it off to Minister Joyce Murray, who is the Minister of Digital Government and your Member of Parliament for Vancouver Quadra.
Well, thanks very much. And thank you, Hannah, for coordinating the event that we're having today. And I'm really happy to be joining everyone. I see we've got close to 100 people participating, and so I'm really pleased that at the level of interest, we're talking about navigating the pathways of reconciliation, as Hannah mentioned, and I chose the word navigating for a reason. It's not always a smooth and straightforward pathway, and so we're like anything that is a new terrain, there's some navigation required, and we also appreciate expertise and various perspectives on how to do that, and that's what Ms. Rivers will be bringing us today. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're currently on the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And before we go into our topic of today, I just wanted to bring you my usual update from Ottawa. So for those who were regulars at MP Breakfast Connections at Enigma or at Aphrodite's, you will know that this is, as your MP, this is also my opportunity and your opportunity for us to connect on what I'm doing on your behalf and what's going on in Ottawa. Of course, I'm not in Ottawa as much as I used to be. I'm primarily working from Vancouver, but I have been there for about 4 weeks out of the last 3 months, I would say. So it's a hybrid life right now. Virtually, I'm involved in everything that is going on with Cabinet. I'm in the Cabinet Committee on Environment and Economy, which is a place where a handful of cabinet ministers discuss, digest, and give feedback on massive documents that are the basis for things that come forward to cabinet in a more concise way. So it's a privilege to be doing that on your behalf. And one of the things is really hot item right now, given just how much we're struggling with the COVID pandemic and the second wave, which is affecting us right across the country. And unfortunately, now for the first time in some of the territories and Indigenous communities are also suffering from COVID outbreaks. So one of the key things that people have on their minds naturally is the vaccine program that we're anticipating for next year. And so I just wanted you to know that we in the government see this as the biggest logistical challenge since the Second World War, to acquire, distribute, and make available to the provinces and territories the means to be able to vaccinate all Canadians in a thoughtful, priority way, but for everybody next year. So we do see the enormity of the challenge. The vaccination is something that Canada is actually pretty good at. I mean, the flu vaccinations roll out every year without much of a hitch. And so the provinces and territories have their programs and places to really implement vaccination. What is of course, the key complexity here is that we are acquiring these vaccines and they haven't been approved yet. So we have pre-purchased 7 different vaccines that were promising. 3 of them are in the lead to be released for distribution soon. And so whoever thought that through in our government, and we do have a vaccine task force of experts who work with our government and advise us, really were bang on which ones to prioritize and purchase. So we have, as you probably have heard, we have purchased more doses of vaccine per capita than any other country. And we have the 3 front runners are also ones that we have purchased. But to get them from the manufacturing place to Canada, to the provinces and territories, to the remote areas, to the communities, to the clinics, given that there's cold chain complexities, some of them have to be kept at 70 degrees below 0 Celsius until within a few days of being of actually being used. So it is an enormous logistics, but we have mobilized a massive set of coordinated experts on this matter. And I think I just want to assure you that everything is being done to get the vaccines to us, to you, as quickly and as effectively as possible in an order of priority, which would include the most vulnerable first. So that's on the vaccine level. You may have been hearing other commentary about it and criticism, and I think that's normal. We're a parliamentary democracy, and opposition parties' job is to see the things that they can oppose or be critical of. But I want to assure you that we've taken this incredibly seriously, and this work is well underway to tackle this enormous logistical challenge. So secondly, there's a environmental legislation, C12. And I wish I was in the room with you, because then I can see from the nods and the shaking of heads whether you've seen my narrative about this in my update that just went out to you last night, and you may have already read what I had to say. But for those who haven't received that update or read it yet, this legislation is a legislative framework for crystallizing the targets and 5-year plans to get to them. But behind it is a massive amount of work that's being done by Environment and Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, DFO, Transport Canada, and other ministries to develop the plans that will get us to those targets. And they are all modeled. I can tell you this is a very substantive set of plans coming forward. It's going through its due diligence, things like cabinet committees, things like Treasury Board. So it may be a few weeks before these roll out. But you can rest assured that this is not just a legislation for a target and no plan. There will be a very substantive plan. So that's 2, is in a reassurance from Ottawa. And the third one I wanted to mention is that there's also a lot of movement on the very, very priority project of making sure we tackle child welfare in Indigenous communities. This has been a very difficult situation that really ties into the heritage of colonialism and residential schools, that there is a great need for support for many children and families, especially in remote, difficult to access, difficult to get the normal kind of services we just take for granted in Vancouver. And so child welfare has been a very painful aspect of our country's reality, that so many children are in care of others because they were deemed not to be able to safely stay with their immediate family. We are changing that. The bill is, I think, Bill C-91 that was passed that will devolve the responsibility to Indigenous communities to take the measures to keep their children safe should that be necessary, and do it in a way that is culturally appropriate and strengthens their connection with their community and extended family, rather than breaking that connection and leading to yet more trauma of disconnection. And so the government we brought that legislation forward, and we've just announced $500 million for the communities to be able to do their work, to be ready to accept this very important and difficult responsibility of child and family welfare, that Indigenous communities will more and more be the ones that are responsible to provide the measures of support for their own families. There has already been, I think, about $3 billion that our government has invested into child and family welfare. This is another $500 million specifically to prepare the communities to take on this responsibility that they have asked for, and that we are going to walk down this pathway with the communities hand in hand to support this transition so that it is a good one. So those are a few of the things that I wanted to mention. There's some recent announcements of BC Indigenous communities getting funding to rebuild and strengthen their governance structure. So all of that work goes on behind, but critical to the pathway of reconciliation. And I wanted to mention some of that good news. So, all right. So I think that with that as my intro, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, who I've known for a number of years and have worked on various initiatives with, and have heard speak as a very dynamic speaker. Not to put you on the spot, Sheryl. So I'll just read you a little bit about Ms. Rivers' background. Sheryl Rivers is a graduate from SFU's Executive Masters in Business Administration in Aboriginal Business and Leadership. She has extensive experience working at the Squamish Nation, where she had various roles, including working in external communications and helping connect various levels of government and companies that wanted to engage in business with the Squamish Nation in the lead up to the 2010 Winter Olympics. And I think we all remember just how effectively that Olympics was, well, just how rich it was because of the four nations' involvement in such a substantial way. And so Sheryl was part of making sure that that could happen. So Sheryl, thank you so much for being willing to share your thoughts on this difficult pathway that we're on, this essential pathway. We've seen some recent examples of how it can be difficult to have just easy and simple solutions with reconciliation. And the situation in Nova Scotia is one example, where Indigenous Mi'kmaq communities asserting their Supreme Court rulings, their rights to fishery, then intersecting with the commercial fishery, who had some concerns, and then there are potentially conservation concerns. And so there's been some really unfortunate conflicts and violence that's happened with the burning of a lobster pound that had Mi'kmaq lobster that they had fished. And so we know that these are not simple things to solve. It's why the government has brought a neutral person to come and talk to people from all sides. But that's just one example, and I know there are many, and I certainly won't go into more, but there are some boulders on this pathway. And Sheryl, I'm really interested in your thoughts about how to approach this. So over to you. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now? I muted while you were talking, so. Tanoy siam siai enagueto. Anhat squallow tiet stays. Siam tanat monedi anas kushamensna. Sheryl Rivers quiensna. Chenwa hue aslahan ochomeoch. Chenwa hue squotmish oth. Hoichach chisha tameoch. Hoichach che siam. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It is such an honor for me to be able to speak the Squamish language. For me, I realize now, after having lost my mom after a few years, I'm really missing speaking the language with her. We used to do that at home all the time. And I realized how rare it is to be able to even speak the language after my late mother had spent 10 years in residential school. So for me, I really treasure and honor our language. And it's actually a strength for me to get through a lot of these boulders that you talk about. Because not only as First Nations, but individually as First Nations, we have these boulders. And for me, the path to reconciliation, the most important thing for me is that, in my perspective, is that we need to also hear the truths to the before reconciliation can take place. We have a lot of hard truths in our communities. As you mentioned about the colonialism, pre-contact, we had systems and structures in place. I hear especially our chiefs speak about how when the tide went out, the table was set for us because of all the treasures in the water. And I reference that because I will be getting back to the Micmac lobster as well. But to bring it into context for us here in the Coast Salish territory, the foods and the environment, as you understand, Joyce, I think not only our connection from SFU, but our connection with the environment has what really gelled us in our friendship over the years. And so for us, the environment has been important. For Squamish in particular, the cedar tree is the most sacred tree and thing, and one of the greatest things in the earth for us. With high regard, we use the cedar tree in every aspect. We use the wood for canoes, for longhouses, for building things, for art pieces, for welcome figures. We use the cedar boughs. I have them placed above my doorways. It helps bring in positive energy. And if anyone coming into your home has any heavy feelings or negativity, it helps to draw that out before the person brings that into the home. And even the rotten part of the cedar tree we use for our medicine we call tumith. When the rotten part of a cedar tree, you touch it, it crumbles into like a powder. And so when you see us wearing that on our faces, and I use it on my feet and hands as part of protection as well. But when you see that, that comes from the cedar tree. So for us, the sustainability is important. And for me, in looking at the environment, I look at also the culture and the spirit, and looking at the medicine wheel approach to how we look at the environment, the economics. I look at it as the physical, mental, emotional, and not just the three pillars, but I add the fourth with the medicine wheel, with the spirit and the culture. And that's where our strength comes upon. And so prior to contact, we had all of these systems in place, and then things happened, such as the Indian Act was created. We had imposed fisheries and hunting, our rights and things like that were taken away. We've had the residential schools. The last one closed in BC in 1986. So that's fairly recent. I had nieces and nephews that actually went to that residential schools in Mission. And I mentioned my late mother, Audrey, went for 10 years. So she went from 5 years old to 15 years old. And so residential schools have had a really strong impact in our communities. As far as the effects have been, I noticed that like my mom never liked to hug, and I never understood why, as I'm a very loving and caring woman. And so I used to always hug my mom goodbye. Even in high school, I was never ashamed to hug her goodbye or anything. And she would never really hug back. And I used to feel a little bit hurt at first about that, because that's my mother, and I want to hug her and love her. And then as I got older, I realized that that was part of the effects of residential school, because they never had that there. The other effect I noticed was the cupboards were always full with cans, and sometimes I'd have 10 loaves of bread on the counter. And one of my late teachers told me that because they had hardly anything to eat while in residential schools, they don't want to go without, and they don't want their families to go without. So they would stockpile their cupboards. So these effects have been going on for generations. And then we moved to the 60 scoop, which then goes to the children in care, as you mentioned. At one point, I worked as a family support worker for Squamish Nation. And I'm very grateful for my late brother, Frank Rivers Jr., doing a lot of work when he was elected council for Squamish Nation in the 1970s and 80s, did a lot to advocate for our rights of our children that were apprehended in our communities. They would be taken away completely from our communities, sometimes to other cities or countries. And so what a lot of my brother and his generation would fight for is that the kids, when they were taken away and apprehended, that the first right of opportunity was given to the grandparents or the aunts and the uncles to take them in, so that they wouldn't lose their culture and identity if they were taken away from their homes. So I talk about these things because these have been long-term effects that have impacted our communities all across Canada and Turtle Island, not just Canada, but in United States as well. And I really, for me, the big turning point, I felt a shift as far as reconciliation starting to take place, not just with the governments, but with Canada as well, with Canadians, was when the apology came for the residential school. And my late mother was selected to go for BC. And I was asked to go to be her emotional support and chaperone her. And the first thing she said to me when she found out we were going was she turned and she said, "We're wearing our full regalia." And I wear my regalia proudly. She said, "I want them to see they didn't take the culture and language away from me." And so when we went to the Ottawa apology 12 years ago, I had no idea what was going to take place. And from the moment we left the hotel room at 7 a.m, Mom was in her full regalia, as I was, but people knew she was a residential school survivor. And everyone right from the elevator went up and shook her hand and said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Right up into Parliament. Senators and MPs like yourself were going and hugging and shaking her hand. And I saw that was all throughout Ottawa at that time. And after the apology, and witnessing all these, to me, have been tough chiefs I've seen in BC all my life, fighting for our rights and title, and to see them in tears in Parliament there. There are no words to describe that. And these are the truths that were happening behind the scenes. And so when we came out of the apology, out of Parliament after, the media asked me how I felt. And the first thing that came to mind is that I feel generations lighter because of the effects that we've had to endure as children and grandchildren. It feels like I don't have to carry this burden of my mother any longer either. And and I seen the transformation after that, I think, in moving towards reconciliation as a whole, for Canada. I had a lot more people asking me about residential schools, or about our language, or about songs, and to me that I noticed someone asked a question of how I measure the successes. And for our communities, I look at more of the qualitative measures than the quantitative. So what are the good quality things and meaningful things that are taking place? Um, and one of the things I'm noticing today is a lot want to reconcile without hearing our truths or dismissing our truths. And our truths need to be heard. They need to be acknowledged. They don't need to be, or shouldn't be, dismissed. And the hard truth is I know that many Canadians are learning first time about a lot of these things, and are appalled at some of these things that took place and want to help. But the other thing we need to watch for is we're able to help ourselves. We have the tools, we have the culture, we have the different things in place in our communities that we've had since time immemorial to help get us through these. And I know in one of the main big things that we like to do is humor. And I noticed that with my late aunts and uncles too. Humor was good medicine for us to get through a lot of these things that we've had to endure over these generations. And I think, to me, the path forward is, and I mentioned this in our phone call, Joyce, was using like an approach like a talking circle, where a feather or a talking stick is handed around to resolve issues such as like the Wet'suwet'en or the Micmac lobster, in looking at the governments, or in the Micmac, the governments, the fishermen, the Micmac, looking at all the people involved in the dispute that's taking place, and sit down in a circle, like where the person who has the feather or the talking stick is the only one that speaks. I know when people get amped up and worked up, they want to speak, or they want to reply to explain their side of why they're fighting on that side. And the talking circle approach allows you to just sit and listen. And I think, to me, that's what I think needs to happen is the feather needs to be acknowledged in a way where the person that's talking or speaking or sharing their story or sharing their concerns or sharing for us, a lot of what we would do is for standing up for our rights and title, is just listening and allowing them that time and that space to finish what it is that they want to share in order to move forward. And so what I'm finding sometimes is that some of them don't want to hear our truths and just dismiss it right away. And I think that would be very meaningful, and it would bring us forward many steps. And it's not up to just one of us to do this. It's not up to Justin Trudeau or you, Joyce, to do this. It's not up to me as someone from Squamish Nation. It's up to all of us. As we say, one mind, one heart, one spirit. And we all live on this earth. My late uncle Uncle Percy used to say, we're all different trees in the forest. We're like cedars, we're firs, we're birch. We all come from different walks of life, but we all grow from the same earth. We all come from the same forest. And if trees can coexist together in the forest, then I think so can we. But it's a matter of learning how to communicate with each other for that. So I think that, to me, on the top of my head, is what I wanted to cover. Is there's anything I missed? I'm just looking at the question now that was sent ahead. But I think I did answer that. How does Sheryl measure success in our efforts within the cultural industry to reconcile our past with our present and future? Well, I think it's happening with with Reconciliation Canada taking place when it did, like I said, to me, that was the turning point for many Canadians. And to look at it in a qualitative manner instead of quantitative as they do, and how do things get done, and looking at it in checking the boxes. And for us, we look at the quality of life and the quality of how we're moving forward to reconcile the differences that we have. I believe that it is going to get a lot easier for all of us if we continue on this path that we're doing. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to get angry. We are going to get all these emotions that will take place. But for me, I always just feel the fear and do it anyway, as I was taught in my early 20s. And never be afraid to speak your truth. I'm not sure how long I had there, but
No. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate those words. And I am sure that amongst our community members here on this, with this gathering, that there are some questions that people would like to pose to you. And so perhaps I'll ask Hannah to, or I'll ask my support team of my MP office to adjudicate the questions and ask them, and interested in your response.
for sure.
And thank you again to Sheryl for the conversation and the presentation, and for sharing her truth with all of us here today. While we let the questions roll in, we're going to issue a poll to the participants to see how they feel about government actions towards reconciliation. So I'll ask David, our tech lead, to run the poll while we wait for the questions to come in. And so the question is, which government initiatives to further nation-to-nation partnerships and reconciliation do you think are the most important? Participants can select any number of initiatives that they feel. So the first one being empowering Indigenous communities to create their own child welfare systems, moving forward on the implementation of UNDRIP, accepting and now implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, committing to eliminate all long-term drinking water advisories, doubling the funding compared to 2016 levels for departments that serve Indigenous people, or passing legislation to reclaim, revitalize, and strengthen Indigenous languages in Canada. So we'll let the poll run for a minute, just while people take the time to read all the options.
Sheryl, while people are reading the poll and submitting it, one of the questions that came up for me was that, I mean, I love the image of in a case of conflict between non-Indigenous community interests, the rights and reconciliation measures for the Indigenous community, and other economic or conservation values that may be at play there as well. The idea of just sitting together with all of the interests at the table and having a way of having a discussion where there is a talking stick or feather. So really it's a listening and being there exercise as much as it is a talking exercise. So the question that I have is, do you have a simple way that we as the Government of Canada can identify who should be in that circle? Because with Wet'suwet'en, for example, one of the complexities was that the elected representatives of the community did not have the same perspective as the hereditary group. And then there was also some question about whether each of the hereditary chiefs had been empowered in in a way that reflected the whole community. And so for the government of Canada, it's like, who do you bring to the table? It can be a big quandary. And if you don't get it right, it's very difficult to move forward effectively. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think that is I could see that as being a big challenge. The elected chiefs and council that we have in Canada, um, that's all through the Indian Act that was formed. So that's the approach that the federal government has been taking. And I think it's important to also look at how to include the others, like the matriarchs or the hereditary chiefs, or we have. I mentioned matriarchs because I know the Mohawks, the matriarchs are the ones that make the decisions. So each one of us are unique and diverse, and it's hard to know, even amongst ourselves, how the proper protocol is. But I think doing things like what the federal Liberal Party is doing, like with the Indigenous Peoples Commission, you have the presidents from the different provinces. They have their finger to the pulse on their provinces and communities, and drawing upon them to look as well as who should we be including in these dialogues, so we're not missing out completely on anyone. That to me would be a good starting point. But I know other parties don't have an Indigenous Peoples Commission like the Liberal Party did, or does. I know some are really trying to start that now, but I think that's a good way to start, as well as looking, depending on the area that you want to engage with. And there are spokespeople that you see maybe in the news a lot that stand up for rights or will go out and protest, or just getting out and finding out from them as well. I know with the missing and murdered inquiry commissioners, they did that. They would engage the women that worked with the abused women or with families of missing women. They were engaged by the commissioners to be a part of the hearing. So
Okay. Yeah, so it's
a lot of big work, but
yeah, no formula, but having the intention to find the right people and use the structures available to guide that. Okay, I don't want to thank you for that, and I don't want to take over all the time that the community members here are allotted to ask you questions as well. So Hannah, back to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share with everyone the results of the poll. So what we're seeing, people identifying as the most important initiative in their view is the commitment to eliminate all the long-term drinking water advisories on reserves. That's how the participants view it. And there were also a couple more that were identified as important, which is accepting and implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, as well as empowering Indigenous communities to create their own child welfare systems.
Okay, well, thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm going to move along to the questions now. First question that we have for Sheryl, this is Jose wondering, how can we improve and increase education opportunities for Indigenous populations?
Improve, I think, would be to help advocate and support our Indigenous communities that want to see change in what's being taught and that would be with the school board trustees, to be writing and advocating to them to see what can be included in the education curriculum. I know in Newsworthy, there was an issue out in Chilliwack about their students, their grade 6 level, I believe, were sent home with homework to put what good things came out of residential school. So that's what not to do in the education system. Things like that, I think, really need to be re-looked at. And that's why I say it's going to take everyone working together towards reconciliation, not just levels of government, but like the school board trustees as well, and looking at the curriculum that can go into the schools. So I think first and foremost would be help us in advocating and writing to the trustees to ensure that the proper curriculum is being posted out there.
Thank you. The next question comes from Gail, who is wondering if you could address the problems that sometimes occur when there are differing goals between different First Nations groups and how to best approach finding a way to bring them together in the midst of these opposing ideas. We've
had a lot of history over shared territories in the past, looking at I'll just use Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh for an example. We had our own traditional territories that we would go hunt and gather at. We respect those protocols. And as time progressed, I know like what Squamish did is we signed what would be considered like a protocol agreement with Seashell, where we clearly defined boundaries. So when we have issues, say, for example, here in Vancouver, we have many that come here from other communities in BC and other provinces and other parts of Canada. And I noticed that one thing that many First Nations have is a respect for the traditional territory that they are on. And so many will just step back and allow the local First Nation whose territory they're on to help with whatever conflict is happening. And kind of, I would say a majority, not all of us, but we would respect that the First Nations and the traditional territory and whatever decision they had. So for example, I mentioned here in the city, we have many First Nations here, and we have the Gassy Jack statue down in Gastown. And there's a history there that took place with one of my ancestral aunties actually that married him. And so when people found out the history of Gassy Jack, many wanted to go and remove that statue and throw it in the water or paint it or whatever. And as Squamish, and a lot of Squamish women spoke up and said, no, we're already working with the city of Vancouver and looking at another way of dealing with this in a proper protocol manner. And so when we came forward and said, no, as Squamish, we would like to see that something worked out in a manner of what I'm speaking, where we sit in dialogue, then everyone just sort of stepped back and said, okay, we respect that. So I find that is common in with many First Nations across Canada. I know when I travel across, I always respect the host community of where I'm at, so.
I look forward to finding out what the next step is with the Gassy Jack statue.
We're looking at it as a way of educating, so a way of sharing the story somehow there at the site.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, Hannah, sorry to interrupt there.
No worries at all. I was just going to say, I'm seeing a couple questions come in. Some people are curious if there are opportunities in Vancouver for residents to perhaps attend or view a talking circle.
It's only depending on the place that they're with. They're usually only done for really important topics. Historically, we would do it, say, if some young person stole something. We'd have a circle with the parents and say the neighbor's son came and stole something from my yard. Then myself and my family and the young boy and his family, and we'd have someone neutral that would run the circle, come in and do that. So it has to be something of topic that needs to be addressed. in order to take place, or for healing. I used to be involved with them when I was in a women's group, when we had to share our stories in a safe manner with each other. So they don't just happen like I can't just say, oh, I'm going to schedule a talking circle next month, um, and then invite people. It has to be for a specific topic or reason.
Kind of coming out of that, we've got a question from Jeremy. Jeremy says, I'm listening to your point that we need to give the time necessary to hear the truths that need to be expressed. Whether talking sick is a process I can take to my organization and is a wonderful suggestion, but it must feel safe to express that truth. Wondering if there is ways that we can encourage that feeling of safety in expressing truths.
I think just letting down the armor initially before walking in, because we can sense the anger and the angst coming from if it's coming on from the other party. So I think just initially taking a look, a check at yourself and how you're feeling before walking in there. It absolutely helps a lot in us feeling a lot more safer, and not get to the point where we feel so frustrated that we want to yell our points either. So that's why I find the talking circle method to be more fair and respectful, and not so aggressive and angry towards each other.
Okay. This next question comes from Kim, and it perhaps speaks to more, we're maybe looking for a little bit of optimism to feel when we see negative news stories about violence or discrimination against Indigenous peoples. So Kim says, when Sheryl hears about the systemic racism, white supremacy, and colonial attitudes that led to the arrest of a grandfather and his granddaughter while trying to open a bank at the BMO, how does she see a path to reconciliation and positive permanent change?
Honestly, it's hard. It's really hard. I mentioned about when things like that happen, the initial anger and defense comes up. It's almost to the point where I felt like that when I found out what residential schools were and what they did to my mom. And I just wanted to go out and deal with it because I just wanted to protect my late mother. It is really hard to go past that. The sad truth is that we've endured so much over time that that almost becomes a norm, and sad to say. And we've learned that because it's happened all the time, to not take it so personal, and to just do what we can. Many of us will go into prayer. I light a white candle and I say prayers for things like that. And I'll say prayers for the ones that are angry, and pray that it doesn't go any further, and to harm any other people. But I think we've learned to just really, with our culture, to sort of let things like that go and not take that on ourselves as well, and to do what we can to make it better. So in that instance with the BMO, BMO stepped up and they've created an Aboriginal advisory group type group that they'll now go to and talk to them about any issues or concerns that they may need to address, and how to do better relations with their Aboriginal clients that they have. But every time it's something different, and it seems like almost daily things happen like that where it just gets us worked up. But I think our culture and our spirituality really help to keep us calm and persevere through.
Thank you.
Cheryl, if I can just do an addendum question. It sounds to me like in this stage of reconciliation, which if we think generationally, 12 years ago is not so long ago that the apology happened. And from my perspective as a liberal member and representative, it's in 2015 that things started accelerating from the government side in terms of funding and signing on to UNDRIP and the Missing and Murdered Women and Girls Project, which I personally championed with Carolyn Bennett for years in the previous government, and it didn't go anywhere. So there's been a momentum increase of respect and impetus for reconciliation on the government's part, but we are very early into this process compared to what it's going to take. So I guess I'm wondering if at this stage it's not surprising that there's still more shocks and like the BMO situation than there are wins, even though there are wins. And there are good initiatives happening. And so would you agree that this is a long road, this path to reconciliation, and that the boulders perhaps are going to get smaller and the path smoother as we go, and it's through experiencing and just responding to to where there's places in our country, our communities, where people don't get it yet, and that's going to change over time. Are you optimistic that way?
I am, and I agree 100%. It's not just going to happen overnight either, because this has been going on for like over 100 years for us. So, and as I mentioned, it's been generations for us. So hopefully it won't take generations and generations to overcome. But yeah, that's why I felt for me, the shift did start to take place with the apology. And one of the things I did notice too, when we had the big walk here for reconciliation for the survivors on Georgia Street, I got to attend that with my late mom, and she could hardly walk. And I had actually just got out of the hospital a few days prior from meningitis. So I was very weak, but I had to be there with her and to stand there with her. So we couldn't walk. So we walked a block and we went to the side and we stood, and mom turned around and she almost dropped to her knees in tears because she said, I'm finally not alone. They finally get what I've gone through, because she's been trying over her lifetime to explain everything she went through in residential school. And it just felt like that big relief was lifted off her shoulders at that point, that she didn't feel alone. I think that was one of the big turning points for me, was just to see that, yeah. But yeah, absolutely. It's not going to happen overnight. And those boulders will get smaller and smaller, and eventually we'll just step over them, and then they'll become little pebbles.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. And I think I'm seeing a lot of this question, and I hope it speaks to a lot of people who are watching this right now, but wondering if you could ask non-Indigenous peoples living in Vancouver or across Canada to do one thing today as a way of taking action in this path forward in reconciliation, what would you suggest?
I think to research all you can on our histories, our different histories. Take a look at the start of the Indian Act. Take a look at what happened with our fishing and hunting rights. Take a look at not just the residential schools that have been in profile, but the 60 scoop. As Joyce mentioned about the child apprehensions in our Aboriginal communities. Do what you can to learn about it on your own, because it can be really exhausting to try and explain that. And I see that a common notice from my colleagues and family and friends too, is a lot of times people ask, well, what about this and what about that? And it's like, we've been trying to explain it for generations, and I think we feel exhausted too. So do your due diligence and research what you can about our different histories in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it is 11:57, so I will say thank you everyone for all your questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but if you'd like to, you can send as a follow-up to our office's main email account, and if Cheryl's okay with it, we can pass along some further questions and see about getting some answers back on those we didn't have time to get to.
Absolutely. I would love to answer them because this is important to me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sheryl. I'm going to pass it off now to Minister Murray for the closing remarks.
Okay, well, thank you, Hannah. I mean, I'm just thinking about that we're just assigning Sheryl some homework after hearing that it's time for us to do our own homework and not ask the Indigenous people to explain things again. So I'm just I'm trying to figure out a different way where we're not sending the work over to Sheryl. So
no, I don't mind because this is for this dialogue specifically. So I get it. But in general, I'm saying just go out there and do your due diligence.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll figure out a way to reduce the burden on you, Sheryl, but thank you for thank you for your willingness. And I have to say, your last story about you and your mom at the parade and your mom just feeling the incredible weight of being alone, trying to have, you know, literally 35 million Canadians get the reality of Indigenous peoples. I mean, I have to confess, it's taken a while for me to get that. Mm-hmm. And I think there's still a lot of Canadians that don't get it. So that's the quantitative side of this pathway to reconciliation, is how many of us Canadians who are non-Aboriginal really can feel and experience in some way what it might be like to have families broken apart, or to have communities dismissed as not being relevant or not allowed to practice their very customs and structures that allowed them to self-govern over all these years effectively and successfully, allowed the communities to negotiate with each other over shared resources and territories, allowed the communities to thrive. I read a book recently called Dark Emu, and it is about it's a researcher with some Aboriginal roots, but it's somebody in the academia that researched Australia pre-contact and wrote a book about the degree to which it was an environment and an ecology that was intentionally managed for food production and for meeting the livelihood needs of the Aboriginal communities in Australia. And he's struggling with that. There's still a narrative in that country that the Aborigines were hunters and gatherers. And so they had no attachment to the land. And so therefore the farmers could come and just take those huge swaths of land in Australia and convert them to sheep farms. Well, he's laid out this incredible map to the reality that these lands were being cultured carefully and sustainably for many thousands of years by the Indigenous peoples. They weren't just hunter-gatherers. I mean, they were, yes, hunters and gatherers, but they were actually culturing their landscape to make it more productive. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that just got destroyed by being trampled over by sheep farms and the very foods that Indigenous people were gathering. They'd actually cultured so it was a very big eye-opener. And I think here in British Columbia, what's relevant is Indigenous peoples have been doing that in our landscapes for all those many millennia. They've been intentionally creating fires in the forest to keep the mix of species such that this could be their food basket and their pharmacy. Mm-hmm. And forests, we think of them for timber. Maybe we're thinking of them for carbon sequestration now. And we know that there's mushroom harvesters, but there's some I don't know, 90 to 100 products that were the supermarket and the pharmacy of Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, successfully nurturing their communities to be healthy and successful. So I'm here myself on a bit of a rant. So anyway, we have work to do. The moment when you said your mom shed the idea that she was trying to have us understand that reality and felt so alone with it before and could see that there was a different time coming. I'm so glad she was able to experience that hope before she passed away. So
absolutely.
Sheryl, thank you so much for what you've given us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joyce.
And now to the community that I can't see all your faces. I do want to say that I miss seeing you at the physical breakfasts where I used to be able to come and say hi at the tables and answer questions in person afterwards. And I do miss the many ways in which I have pre-pandemic was able to be part of your individual communities and see you in the neighborhoods at neighborhood events. And so I do want to invite you, if you're part of a community group that's having a virtual gathering and you would like me to drop in to greet people, to meet your community leaders of whatever type of community it is, and perhaps say a few words of greeting or even do a quick Q&A. I'm quite happy to do that. In fact, I'd be delighted to, because I am feeling a little isolated, as we all are, with the realities of the pandemic. So think about that. If it's appropriate, just let my office know and we'll try and, if my schedule permits, I'll drop in to be able to say hello. So, and I'll just end this by saying that I wish everyone season's greetings of all faiths or non-religious faiths. And, and I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all. And I hold in my heart the challenges that you face with the pandemic and the social or physical isolation, and wish you all the best for your health and good connections over the coming months. So until we meet again. And thanks again, Sheryl.
Thank you.
Sheryl and Minister, if we could just take a quick minute to, for David to take a picture of the event. If everyone can just hold a smile for a moment. I believe David's ready, so I'll count down.
Oh, I was just going to say to Sheryl, normally we offer a bottle of lovely BC wine to our guests, but we won't be doing that, but there will be something coming to your address to thank you so much for enriching our meeting today.
Thank you. In the future too, and after COVID and we can get together, I would love to come to one of your breakfasts if you get them back. And just to follow up with this, just so people can see in person.
Okay, great. Thank you for that offer.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll count us down for a picture. David, I'm assuming is ready, so.
Yes, sorry, Minister, can I ask you to please remove your glasses though? We're catching the glare again. Thank you.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Okay, David, did you get it?
Got some, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
And, thanks to all the staff who've done a great job of organizing this too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.